Okay, hello everyone. Again, this is John from Nickthin Gaming, and I want to tell you the basic Photoshop necessities to edit photos for a Unity project. Now, the most basic thing is to create or open a file. So to do that, you go File and New to create a file. And you can pick any resolution that you want. It will also save your previous resolutions. So for example, my latest image that I edited in Photoshop was 1024 by 1024 pixels at a 300 pixels per inch resolution. I've also done 1080 by 1920, a phone style, or land or portrait style, 256 by 256, 512 by 512, 17 by 17 inches. I also have things like basic letter size, 8.5 inches by 11 inches. Now you set that here, or you can also set the default file name. This doesn't matter because you will rename it when you save it anyways. But yeah, then you have the width, and I set it by pixels. And this is the dots from left to right. So if I were to create a file with 1 pixel wide and 1 pixel high, it would only be one single pixel. If it's 2 pixels wide by 2 pixels high, that would be 4 pixels, and so on and so forth. You can also set it by inches, centimeters, millimeters, points, and picus. And this just determines what you're using it for. If you're creating something for Unity or for the web, you should use pixels because that is the format that they work in most of the time. Next part is the resolution, the pixels per inch. And this kind of determines how big your image is. So this tells me that my image at 1024 pixels is going to be about 3 inches by 3 inches, maybe 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And that would kind of just give you a real world feel for the size of your image. But that does not matter too much. I missed the pause. Okay. You also have the color mode. You can set it to bitmap, grayscale, RGB, red, green, blue color, CMYK, crimson, maroon, yellow, and K. Google it. Or lab color. I stick with the default RGB color because that is, again, what Unity and the web use. And then the bit count. So with bitmap, you just have 1 bit. Grayscale 8-bit 1632, same with RGB. CMYK is 8 and 16-bit, and lab is 8 and 16. Again, I just do RGB 8-bit, and I believe that's the number of colors that you have to work with. And I find it just fine to keep it at the default RGB and 8. For the background contents, this does not matter because it's very easy to change in file. I usually keep it as white or transparent. You could set it to custom where you can drag around to whatever color you want. But I'll keep it as white and show you how to turn a white background content to transparent. In the advanced options, you have the color profile and the pixel aspect ratio. I do not change these, so the color manage, you can say what special classification you are working with, but I have never had an issue with setting the color profile, so I do not change that. I just say don't color manage. There's also the pixel aspect ratio where you can use square pixels, circle pixels, widescreen pixels, and so on, but I do not change that as well. These values do change from Photoshop to Photoshop, and currently I am using Photoshop 2020, as you can see right here, Photoshop 2020. So I will create a small image of 256 by 256. You do have to be careful with creating a Photoshop file. If you create something small, that's perfectly fine. But if you create something large, like if you create something that's 10,000 pixels by 10,000 pixels, you will need a very good graphics processor on your computer, or you will have trouble using Photoshop. Again, if you use Photoshop on a very old computer, even if you are using 256 by 256 at a 300 ppi, it can still take a very long time from click to display, which means you click the mouse button and then a pixel appears on screen. If you have a poor GPU for the amount of pixels that you are editing at once, this will move very slow. So if you notice your computer is running very slow, or even not drawing a line as you move your mouse across the screen, then you should think of reducing your PPI or your pixels. Now I will go ahead and create this, and it will load this. Some basic keys is holding the Alt button and using the scroll wheel. You can also do this with a touch screen by zooming in with your fingers by pinching your fingers, touching the mouse pad, and moving out while holding the Alt key, and this will zoom in and out. The Control key with the mouse can move it left and right, but only if you see the line at the bottom. So right now there is no line because I am not zoomed in far enough. Now I am, so I can scroll up to move left or scroll down to move right. I can also, while holding neither Control nor Alt, in simply scrolling with the scroll wheel, I can scroll up, as you see here, and scroll down. Now, some keys that will be very important are the Move key. The Move key is selected with the V command. You can also right-click it to see the Artboard tool, but I have never used that. There are also the marquee tools, which are selected with M. You have the rectangular marquee, elliptical marquee, single row, and single column marquee tools. With the rectangular marquee, what this does is it selects things in a square range. While you are holding this, you may also hold the Shift key and it will create a perfect square. As you see, this one is 104 by 104 pixels, and I cannot change it from that 1-to-1 ratio. If I, however, let go, I can now change the ratio, which is now 45 to 151 pixels. By letting go, it creates this area. And what that means is, if I take my pencil, which I will talk about soon, and I start coloring, nothing happens outside of the area that I was drawing. But once I color inside of the area, it will place the color. And this helps you section off the area that you want to color. Now, with Photoshop 2020, they added something that they did not have in Photoshop 2016, which is the undo keys. To undo, you can do Edit and Control Z, and redo is Shift Control Z. So Control Z to undo, or Shift Control Z to redo. You can undo as far as you want. The other marquee tool is the elliptical marquee, which will create circles. we'll talk about what that was. Again, holding shift creates a perfect circle, and simply dragging it around will create an oval. Another thing that you can do with the rectangular marquee tool and the elliptical marquee tool is you can set the style. The style has normal, fixed ratio, and fixed size. Normal means you can do whatever you want with it. Fixed ratio means it will always be from width to height. So if I say 1 to 1, that means it will always be a perfect circle no matter what. If I say 2 to 1, it will always have 2 width to 1 height. But I do not use fixed ratio much. What I will use is fixed size. Fixed size will always create a shape of the size that you put in here. As you are dragging your shapes around, you will also see these purple-pink lines. Right now, you can see by the lines that my circle is perfectly in the center of my image. When you have other items as well, it will tell you when you're aligned with those items. Right now, there's a purple-pink line at the top of my image. This tells me that I'm at the very top of my image. If I drag it over, there is now a purple-pink line at the left. Also, I can see from the top right of my mouse button that I have moved to the right 24 pixels and I have moved down 31 pixels. This helps if you want to move your shape over by a specific amount. So say I want to move it down 5. Now I know, okay, that's 6. If you want to make specific movements, as you see here, I cannot go from 3 to 4 or 5. It jumps straight to 6. You can use your arrow keys. The up and down arrow keys will move your selection by 1 pixel. And as long as you have not selected the colored pixels underneath, it should not move those with it. However, it may move those with it under the certain circumstances. Another thing to worry about is anti-alias. If you are coloring something like a face or a nature background and you want to blend colors to make it look more realistic, then you want anti-alias on. However, if you are working with a specific resolution or pixel image, then you would most likely want anti-alias off. To give you an example, this is without anti-alias. You see that it stops at the line. However, if I turn anti-alias on and I make another shape, let's try to align it exactly. Let's see if I can. I cannot align it exactly at this time, but it is close enough. Now I have anti-alias on. When I go to my pencil tool, and you can see around the edges that we are getting a gray color. So if we zoom in, over here it's perfectly black, but over here it's opaque or transparent. So what anti-alias does is it will bleed over. Your feather is the amount that it bleeds over. So if I turn it up and I turn the anti-alias on, now let's put my shape here, we can see that it is very light. And only in the center is it actually dark. So that is what anti-alias does. It also lets you color outside of the area. So if you are noticing a bleeding effect, this is called the bleeding effect, then you should check that anti-alias is on and feather has value to it. Again, I do not use feather or anti-alias with my pixel perfect selections. Now, to select things in a layer, you can also press Ctrl and A, and that will select the entire layer. If you want to select the whole layer and then only the pixels that have color added to them and not the transparent pixels like over here, you can press V to move to your selection tool, press the up key and then the down key, and now you see only the parts with color are selected. And then I can press delete to delete them. The lasso tool I do not use, but it helps you select an area of whatever you want. And it does its best to form the circle. I do not use this because this is best used for something like a photo where you want to select the general area of someone's face. I prefer to do the rectangular marquee tool, and I will zoom in and grab things pixel by pixel. You can increase your selection with the Shift key, where you see a plus around the cursor, or the Alt key, where you see a minus around the cursor. So Shift is to add and Alt is to subtract. The other things that you have are the Magic Wand tool. The Magic Wand tool will select everything with one color. So if I make a black line, I make a white line, let me change the color to red, and now we have a red line. Now with the Magic Wand tool, which you can select with the W key, you can click on the black and it only selects the black. Click on the white and it only selects the white. Click on the red and it will only select the red. Another thing to be aware of is something called contiguous. If you notice, when I click this red color with contiguous off, it will select all of the red. However, pressing Ctrl D to unselect this, if I have contiguous on and I click the red color, it will only select the red color that is touching the pixel that I clicked. If I do something like this and I select the red, if I select here, it will select this red, but it will not select this red. So again, only the red that is touching the pixel that I clicked. Tolerance is another very important thing. Tolerance is how close can the pixel be to the color that to the original color that I selected. So with a tolerance of 15 with contiguous off, so it selects everything, if I click the black, it will not select this as well. But if I raise the tolerance and say put it to 50, and then I select the black, let's try to go a little bit higher. Let's try 100, well, a lot higher. There we go. Now it also selects the gray because it is within a tolerance of 100 from the color. You can also set it all the way up to 255 and see that it selects the black, the gray, and the white. But it does not select the red because red is not within a 255 color radius tolerance of the black. There is also anti-alias, which allows bleed around your selection, and sample all layers, which would grab the color, the pixel color that you clicked along every layer here, which we will talk about later. There's also the sample size. I always do point sample. However, it can also grab the average of the samples around it. This is a 3x3, so it grabs the 9 cells around the pixel that you clicked. And uses the average color of that area to select the colors. The next thing is the eyedropper tool. This will select whatever color that you move it over. So this shows me that it's red, white, black, and gray, and it changes your top color. You can also click on the color and you automatically get the eyedropper tool. Even if I am over here and I click on the color, I still have the eyedropper tool while this color picker foreground color is active. The foreground color means the color on top, while the background color is the color behind. You can click this arrow key to switch them, or you can press the X key on your keyboard. D, as hovering over here says, will set it to the default foreground and background color. You can also click this button and it will set them to the default. There is the spot healing brush, but as this video shows, that is best used on photos and not for video game asset creations. There is the pencil tool, the brush tool, the color replacement tool, and the mixer brush tool. The brush tool will have a lot of bleed to it, which means it will color red, pink, white, and then opaque. So I always use the pencil tool, which gives me a pixel perfect point. You can select the different brushes that you want. As you can assume, the soft one will be a bit opaque with a feather to it. The hard round will be hard. You also have the hardness and your size. The size is how many pixels it is. You can set it down to 1 pixel, where as you see when I zoom in, I can edit 1 pixel at a time. This is very good for making pixel art if you want to make true pixel art. Or you can set it all the way up to 5,000 and just color everything at once. The delete key will delete anything that is selected. So Control A and delete will easily erase everything. There is also the mode, which you can play around with, but I keep it at normal. Opacity is how dark or light the pencil is. So this shows only 50% of the black color, while it is also 50% transparent. I like to make sure that it is at 100%, otherwise you may not get the color that you want, and it would show whatever color you put this image on top of. The next thing to pay attention to is the eraser tool. You don't want the background or magic eraser, just the eraser tool is fine. So let me make some lines here. The eraser tool selected with the E tool can be set to a mode, a brush, pencil, or block. I like the pencil because now it works as the opposite of a pencil, where the pencil will place, or my pencil will place a black color. The eraser tool will place a transparent color, completely erasing whatever pixels are underneath it. If you reduce the opacity, this is the same as using a pencil with a reduced opacity. So this is an eraser of 52%. However, if I set my pencil to about 50%, it is the same color as over here. Let me turn my pencil back up and my eraser back up. There is also smoothing and angle, which will add some opacity to it. The next important thing is the gradient and the paint bucket tool. The paint bucket is just like with your Windows Paint. It will fill up everything. It will also only affect the color that you click on. So as you see, it has a tolerance, much like the magic wand tool, where it will only select pixels with this. It also has contiguous, so if you can see here, I have a little black dot that was not colored. If I add more black to this, and I try my paint bucket tool with contiguous on, and I change it to red, and I click here, it will only change what it is touching. And then the tolerance would change things, contiguous would change things, anti-alias would add a bit of a bleed to it. Of course, there is nothing really to bleed onto here. The blur tool, the dodge tool are more for photo manipulation, as you see there. The pen tool is also not something that I use a lot. However, the horizontal type tool is something I use a lot. The vertical type tool and the mask tools I do not use, as I do not type in Japanese and I do not want to mask something. The horizontal type mask tool is great if you want to type on top of an image and then set that image as the color of your text. Let's actually undo this and get rid of everything in my scene. Now, just like with normal typing, you can set the point font. I will set it to 12. My Photoshop also comes with an extensive font library, and you can Google how to add more fonts to your Photoshop. I believe you just need to drag and drop your TTF files into a certain folder on your computer. You can set the alignment and the color. Let's say if I want a nice pink text at 12 point, I can set it to sharp, crisp, strong. Sometimes they have bold here. It depends on the font. There's also here where it might say regular or bold. So this text should be at 12 point font, but Ravi is a very large point text. Oh, and I'm using a small image of 250 by 250. So I click the check mark to verify this, and it says lorem ipsum, which is just a kind of pig Latin thing for saying I have nothing to say. It's fake text to fill up things. You can select everything, you can type over it, Control A to select things, just like Microsoft Word. Move it to the right, the left, the middle. You can add warping to it, so you can set it as an arc, a shell, and you can just play with these as you want. You can also create 3D text with it. Be careful with the size of your text, because if your text size is very large, like if you do full text on a 1024 by 1024 with a 5-year-old GPU, and then you try to warp the text or add 3D effects, it can take a long time for your computer to process the changes that you want done to your text. Now you can also see the text layer, which we'll talk about soon, because I want to go into one last thing. The path selection I don't really use. The line tool I don't use, but the rectangular tool, the rounded rectangle or ellipse tool, these are nice to use too, but I prefer to use the rectangular marquee to select things and then use the pencil to fill them in like this. And finally the zoom tool, which you can do by Alt and the scroll wheel. There are other selections here, but I do not play with those. As I told you, you can click on the foreground color to edit the foreground color. You can click on the background to edit the background color. You can click the arrow keys or X to switch the foreground and background, and you can click the black and white squares or the D key to set the default foreground and background colors. I do not play with these buttons, the quick mask or the change screen mode. And now let's talk about the final important thing, the area with the layers. With the layers, you can create many things. Now, say I use the, oh yes, we never talked about the gradient tool, my bad. So the gradient tool will create, as you might expect, a gradient. As you see here, we have the pink color on the left, a blue in the middle, and then a purple and a blue on the right. And when I drag from here to here, at the circle here, it will be pink like this. And then when I let the mouse go, it will be blue like the edge. So if I put it all the way over here, it will look like this. But if I only put it halfway, then blue will take up all this area. There are other options. So this is the circle key where everything is in a circle. There is this key where there is a line and then kind of a fade between the colors. There's this color where it will mirror the colors. And then there's this little star one where it will create a star in your colors. Photoshop comes with many default colors which you can select by pressing this down key and see what colors they have. And then you just click off of it and you can apply the color. Oh, that's pretty nice. Now there are also the modes, just like with your pencil, and the opacity, as we've talked about. There is reverse, which will put black in the middle and light on the outside. And then dither and transparency. Transparency allows it to have transparent parts, and dither, you would need to Google the exact definition of that. Now, if you do not see a selection that you like in the drop-down menu, you can click on the color yourself and you get to the gradient editor. Clicking to the gradient editor on the bottom allows you to add a color to the gradient. Say I want to add a pink there. Clicking on the top allows you to add the transparency. So the bottom is the color and the top is the transparency. You can also drag everything around to say where you want it and click the delete key to remove it. So say I want more black or less black. I can move it around. This also gives me a sharp black edge, and I say okay, and now I have that sharp edge there. Or if I drag this over like this, there will be more of a gradient there. Okay, so that's the gradient tool. Now for layers. Layers says what is on top of what. So now I have lots of black on top of my gradient. If I go to the white, I can now place white on top of the gradient and the black. But if I click and hold the layer and move it below the black, you now see that the white is behind the black and I cannot color on top of the black. But if I drag it over, everything that was there is still there. So you need to look at your layers as well. You can also name a layer by double clicking it and then typing it in and pressing enter. You can do lots of other things. However, the only things that I really use are merge down, merge visible, and flatten image. But I believe you can also set a color for the outline here if you want to call attention to a certain layer to kind of color code your layers. For the more complex Photoshop images, you will have many layers. Another thing that you can do is you can mask. So if I create a mask with this layer, anywhere where I color black is taken away. So you can see I can kind of erase this or mask it. And if I add the white, I can put it back. So this works with black and white to hide or show a color. If I go to my gradient and I click the mask tool and I color with black, I can erase it, but it is still there. So if I ever want it back, so mask is a way to erase without destroying. Another thing to look at is merge layers. So I have layer 5 and layer 1 showing right now. If I right click on layer 5 and I say merge visible or flatten image, it will merge the layers. If I did flatten image, it would merge every layer and delete any layer that is turned off. As it says, it will discard the hidden layers, and I click OK and they're gone. I can do Control Z in Photoshop 2020 to undo that. In Photoshop 2016, you do not have a history to undo and redo much, if at all. There is also the hue and saturation that I use a lot. There are a few other things here that you can look at, but I usually do the hue and saturation. With hue and saturation, you can change the hue and saturation of the layer and it will change everything. However, what I do is I use it to colorize, which will change the color. So right now I have everything colorized to red, but I drag it over and now it's yellow, now it's green and blue and purple and pink, and you can use it to colorize. Now, as you might see here, it does not colorize on black. So if I change that black to white, it also does not colorize on the white. So colorize will only work on other colors. So if I put a green here and I color the green, it looks like I am coloring with orange. But if I turn off the hue and saturation, you can see that it's actually green. Now, as you might see here, the different darkness and lightness of the images will change how the hue and saturation affects it. This is a good thing, as it will keep the way an image looks. I will talk to you more about this later, but I like to use colorize. Hue sets the color, saturation says how much of the color does it show, or how gray is it, from full color to full gray. The lightness is full white to full black, or does it show the pure color at 0. You can also select these values and press the Enter key if you do not want to drag the bar around. Another thing with layers is you can click the eyeball or the empty square to show or hide them. The eyeball means you can see, the empty square means you cannot see. Sometimes layers will have a lock on them and you can click the lock. For example, if I say flatten image, you will see a lock there. That means I cannot do much to the image. I cannot drag it around because this is a background layer and you cannot move a background layer. To undo this, I can click the lock and now I can move it around. You also can't reshape them and do many other things to them. Another thing you might want is to create a group or a folder, which you can give a name, and you can drag things in. Now, as you might see here, I have this layer with green, and if I hide the group, it will hide everything inside of the group. I can also click on the group to show everything inside of the group. So if I have the group hidden and I take this green and I drag it into the group, it will disappear. Finally, the plus to add new layers. On the layers too, you can double click away from the text and it will open up this layer style. Let me add some black to this layer and maybe some green, and we can see what the different styles do. Now you can just click on these and see what they do. Drag the bars around, so bevel and emboss will add this effect to it. Contour will add the contour to them, kind of where the shadows go. You can turn it off again. I can add the depth. I can add the size. I can turn it off. You can set the stroke, which is the outline of something. You can set the size of the stroke. You can set the opacity. Is it inside or outside or from the center of the image? There's inner shadow, which, as you might imagine, is the shadow inside of the image. There's also inner glow, which we see very well here, which is the glow on the inside of the image. Noise means how pixelated is it. Opacity is how white is it. There's choke, you can see that's how far does it spread. Size will affect that as well. And just play with the settings in here. There's even gradient overlay, pattern overlay where you add a pattern on top of something. The different colors will be affected in different ways by pattern overlays. As you see, the green is completely unaffected, while the black is very water-like, as our pattern is. If you turn everything off and click cancel, nothing will happen. So you need to have it turned on. Let's turn on the pattern overlay and click OK, and now it's there. Once it's there, you can click the eyeball to turn it off and then just minimize it. The other thing is the trash can, where when you have a layer selected, you click on the trash can or the delete key. Now, something else to notice is when I have this selected, I cannot do things like zoom in or out because one of my options on the toolbar is currently taking the intrigue of my mouse and keyboard shortcuts. So if you ever notice that your keyboard and mouse are not working inside Photoshop, look for a blue line and just click off of it anywhere in here, and then you can zoom in and zoom out again. But when I click here, I cannot zoom in or zoom out until I click on here, and now I can zoom in and zoom out. I do have another video in my YouTube about how to change the shortcuts. Shortcuts are necessary when using Photoshop. So I definitely recommend editing your shortcuts to something that you agree with. Even write down your shortcuts until you can memorize them. There is a timeline that is outside of the scope of this tutorial. The timeline will allow you to create a GIF or even a full-length video. But I believe there are better tools to create an actual animated video than in Photoshop, but it is possible. The window key will allow you to open up any of the windows that you notice are gone. Like I have the layers window, the properties window, the timeline, the tools. All of these are opened through the window. The view I do not use because you can control everything from the mouse. The snap shows the purple pink lines like I showed you earlier in the video. The 3D is not used much because I do not use 3D in Photoshop. The filter can be very interesting. I definitely recommend going through here. Distort can do something like add a twirl to something. If I want to spin this, now it's spinning. So it creates a quick Naruto symbol. There's also select, where you can select everything, or if you see I have just the green part selected, I can go to select and do inverse right here, inverse. Now I have everything outside selected. So now I can paint color outside, but select inverse. Now I can only color inside. There's also modify, and I like to use contract and expand. Expand will grow out, contract will bring in. Feather will expand it out or contract it in, but it will still allow you to color on the pieces outside of it, which again is best used for picture manipulation and not for Unity ready assets. Grow is similar to expand. You can also select all layers, deselect layers, and other things here which I recommend playing around with. I do not use type a lot, and I do not use layer because for layer you can just right click over here and see all of the options that you see in layer. There is image, which I do use, so I use image rotation to flip the image horizontally, or if I select the green part and I want to reduce my image size, currently it is 256 by 256. If I click image crop, it will crop my image, and now it's 203 by 176. You can undo a crop as well, which is nice. There's also trim, canvas size. Canvas size will set the size of the background, while image size would set the size of the image on the canvas. You can play with those to see exactly what they do. The edit key would allow you to edit both the currently active Photoshop document and your preferences and settings. Finally, you have file. This is where you go to create new files, open files, close files, browse in the Adobe Bridge, export them, generate them. I use export a lot. Save for web legacy is if you create a timeline and you want to export a GIF. You must go to save for web legacy. However, I always use quick export as PNG. You can also do export as and then select the type that you want to save it as. Do you want it as a PNG, JPG, GIF, or SVG? I do GIF through the Save for Unity Legacy because GIF does not always appear, and you can set the frames a bit better, I believe. Now, as you see, I do have my shortcut set up in the file for my export as PNG, which will allow me to save the file as a PNG anywhere I want on my personal machine. The final thing that I would like to talk about with Photoshop is opening up an existing photo. So I have my match 3 photos over here, and if I take my logo and I drag it from the File Explorer onto the Photoshop, it will open it. I can also drag it and drop it on the top area where it says copy, and it will open up a new one. If I want to add the image to my currently opened file, I drag it there instead of up here, where it will now place it on the image. With this, it will give me the transformation controls, where I can either select it and it will commit the transform and place the image into my image, or I can click cancel and it will cancel the placement of the image. And that is all that I have to say about Photoshop. If you have any more questions about things, let me know. If you have any comments as well. I look forward to hearing them. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.